I woke knowing the scent of roses made another woman weep, though I had never smelled roses in my life. The memory was not mine, yet it lived in my mind as vividly as my own childhood, as certain as my own name. My name is Eleanor Ashford, and I am 24 years old, the youngest daughter of a once respected family, now quietly crumbling into genteel poverty. I tell you this because I must anchor myself to facts, to the solid ground of my own history, now that the borders of my mind have become porous and strange. I tell you this because in 3 months' time I will no longer be certain who Eleanor Ashford is, or if she ever truly existed at all. But I am getting ahead of myself. I must begin at the beginning. On that cold November morning in 1889, when I first walked through the doors of the Thorne Institute for Advanced Medicine on Harley Street. London was wrapped in fog that day, the kind that turns gaslight into ghostly halos and makes every footstep echo in the emptiness. My sister Charlotte had accompanied me as far as the corner, her gloved hand tight on my arm, her face pinched with worry beneath her mourning bonnet. We had buried our father only 6 weeks before, and the black crape still hung heavy on our dresses, a constant weight reminding us of everything we had lost. Our father's death had left us with debts we could not pay, and a house we could no longer afford to heat properly. Charlotte had already taken a position as a governess with a family in Kensington. I had chosen a different path, one that offered not mere wages, but a substantial payment that could settle our debts entirely. I had volunteered to participate in a medical study. The advertisement had appeared in the Times in late October, tastefully worded, promising compensation for participants in a revolutionary surgical procedure. The Thorne Institute sought healthy young women between the ages of 20 and 30 for a groundbreaking study of anesthetic agents. The payment offered was more than a governess would earn in 2 years. Charlotte had begged me not to go. But what choice did we have? Pride cannot pay creditors, and dignity does not keep a roof over one's head. I kissed Charlotte goodbye at the corner and walked the final block alone, my boots clicking on the wet pavement, my breath misting in the frigid air. The institute rose before me like something from a Gothic novel, all dark brick and narrow windows, with a brass plaque beside the door that gleamed even in the dim morning light. Dr. Sebastian Thorne, the plaque read, Fellow of the Royal Society, pioneer of modern anesthetic science. I had read about Dr. Thorne in the newspapers. He was something of a sensation in medical circles, a young physician who had made his name developing new methods for rendering patients insensible to pain during surgery. Before his innovations, operations had been brutal, agonizing affairs. Now, it was said, patients slept peacefully through even the most invasive procedures, waking with no memory of suffering. It seemed a miraculous thing, a blessing for humanity. I did not yet understand what it meant to wake with memories that did not belong to you. A housekeeper in severe black answered the door and led me through a narrow hallway to a waiting room appointed with uncomfortable chairs and medical journals. I was not alone. 3 other women sat waiting, each dressed in the respectable but slightly shabby clothing of gentlewomen fallen on hard times. We exchanged nervous glances, but did not speak. What was there to say? We all knew why we were here. We all needed the money. One by one, we were called into an examination room where a gray-haired physician checked our pulses, listened to our hearts, and asked intrusive questions about our health, our families, our monthly courses. I answered everything with the resigned honesty of someone who has already surrendered her dignity. When he had finished, he pronounced me fit for the study and told me to return the following morning, fasting, for the first procedure. I did not meet Dr. Thorne that day. I would not see him until I woke from the anesthesia, when the world had already begun to fragment and reform around me, when my mind had already been opened like a door left carelessly unlocked. The next morning arrived too quickly. Charlotte held me tightly before I left, her thin shoulders shaking beneath her shawl. She was only 2 years older than I, but grief had aged her, had carved lines around her mouth that had not been there when father was alive. I promised her I would be careful. I promised her I would come home safely. I meant those promises when I made them. The institute was colder inside than the November streets. I was shown to a private room on the second floor, a clinical space with white walls and a narrow bed covered in starched linen. A nurse with stern features and capable hands instructed me to remove my dress and put on a cotton gown that tied at the back. My fingers trembled as I obeyed. I was not afraid of pain. I was afraid of the unknown, of surrendering control, of placing my consciousness in the hands of strangers. The nurse returned with a wheeled table bearing glass syringes and small brown bottles labeled in Latin. She explained the procedure in a flat, emotionless voice. I would be given an injection of the experimental anesthetic agent developed by Dr. Thorne. I would fall asleep within moments. While I slept, minor surgical procedures would be performed. Nothing dangerous, merely small incisions to test healing rates and tissue response. I would wake within an hour, she said, feeling perhaps a little disoriented but otherwise perfectly well. I would be monitored for several hours before being allowed to return home. She did not tell me that I would wake knowing things I should not know. She did not tell me that consciousness is not as singular as we believe, that the boundaries between minds can blur and bleed, that the self is a more fragile thing than any of us dare to imagine. I lay down on the narrow bed. The nurse swabbed my arm with something cold and sharp-smelling. I felt the needle slide beneath my skin, a brief sting, and then a warmth spreading up my arm like honey in tea. The ceiling above me seemed to recede, or perhaps I was sinking, falling gently through layers of reality. I heard the nurse's voice from very far away, saying something about counting backwards from 10. I never reached 1. Instead, I found myself standing in a garden I had never seen before, beneath a summer sun I did not remember, holding the hand of a child whose name I somehow knew was Thomas. The roses were blooming, their scent thick and cloying, and I was weeping, though I did not know why. The child looked up at me with solemn eyes and said, "Mama, why are you crying?" And I wanted to tell him, wanted to explain, but I could not remember who I was or why I was there or whose hand I was holding. Then the garden dissolved, and I was in a different place, a dark bedroom with heavy curtains, lying in a bed that was not my own, feeling the weight of another body beside me, hearing the sound of breathing that was not mine. I felt terror then, a crawling horror at the intimacy of this stranger's presence, this violation of my solitude. I tried to move, to escape, but I could not remember how to command my limbs. And then I was elsewhere again, in a carriage rolling through nighttime streets, watching the gaslight slide past the windows in streaks of gold, and a man's voice was speaking, low and urgent, telling me something I needed to remember but could not quite grasp, something about danger, about secrets, about love that could not be spoken aloud. The images came faster then, fragmenting, overlapping, a kaleidoscope of moments that were not mine. A woman's face in a mirror, older than my own face, with lines of bitterness etched around her mouth. A child's funeral, a small white coffin covered in lilies. A man's hands, scarred and beautiful, reaching for me in the darkness. A scream echoing through an empty house. Blood on white marble. A door closing, final and absolute. I woke gasping, my heart pounding against my ribs like something caged and desperate for escape. The white ceiling of the Institute's examination room swam into focus above me. The nurse was there, her face professionally blank, checking my pulse with cool fingers. "Everything is quite normal," she said. "Elevated heart rate, but that is to be expected. How do you feel, Miss Ashford?" How did I feel? I felt as though I had been turned inside out, as though my mind had been ransacked and left in disarray. But more than that, I felt the presence of others inside my own head, memories that crowded alongside my own, images and emotions that belonged to people I had never met, the garden with the roses, the child named Thomas, the dark bedroom, the hands reaching in the night. I began, and then stopped. How could I explain? Who would believe me? "I feel quite well," I finished weakly. A little strange, perhaps, disoriented. That is perfectly normal, the nurse assured me. The anesthetic affects the memory centers of the brain. You may experience some confusion, some false recollections. It will pass within a few hours. But it did not pass. As the day wore on, as I sat in the recovery room drinking weak tea and eating dry biscuits, the foreign memories grew stronger, more insistent. I knew things I should not know. I remembered a house on the edge of Hampstead Heath, though I had never been to Hampstead. I remembered the taste of strawberries eaten in secret in a summer garden. I remembered the voice of a man I had never met, calling me by a name that was not Eleanor. The other women in the recovery room were experiencing similar phenomena. I could see it in their faces, the confusion, the dawning horror. One of them, a pale girl with auburn hair, kept touching her face as though trying to confirm her own features. Another sat very still, her eyes fixed on nothing, her lips moving soundlessly as though she were reciting someone else's words. It was late afternoon when Dr. Thorne finally appeared. I had been waiting for him, dreading him, needing to see the man responsible for this violation of my mind. He entered the recovery room with an air of controlled energy, a man in his middle 30s with dark hair swept back from a high forehead, sharp features, and eyes the color of smoke. He wore a black coat and carried himself with the confidence of someone accustomed to admiration and authority. He spoke to each of us in turn, asking questions, taking notes in a leather-bound journal. When he reached me, he studied my face with an intensity that made me want to look away, as though he could see through flesh and bone to the chaos inside my skull. "Miss Ashford," he said. His voice was cultured, smooth, with an undercurrent of something I could not quite identify. Excitement, perhaps, or hunger. "Tell me what you remember from the procedure." "I remember," I said slowly, "a garden, roses, a child, and other things that cannot be mine." His expression did not change, but I saw something flicker in his eyes. Satisfaction, perhaps, or triumph. "Describe them to me," he said. And so I did. I told him about the garden, about Thomas, about the dark bedroom and the carriage and the hands reaching in the night. I told him about the woman's face in the mirror and the child's funeral and the blood on white marble. As I spoke, he wrote rapidly in his journal, his pen scratching across the pages with fierce concentration. When I had finished, he was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "What you are experiencing, Miss Ashford, is a rare but not unprecedented side effect of the anesthetic. The drug acts on the memory centers of the brain in ways we do not yet fully understand. In some cases, it appears to—" He paused, searching for words, open channels between individual consciousnesses. "You are experiencing not false memories, but real ones. Memories belonging to other patients who have undergone the same procedure." I stared at him. "You mean I am remembering someone else's life?" "In fragments, yes." He closed his journal with a snap that made me flinch. The effect should diminish over time as the drug leaves your system. Within a week, you should be entirely yourself again. But that was a lie, though I did not know it then. The effect did not diminish. If anything, it grew stronger. The foreign memories did not fade. They accumulated, layering themselves over my own recollections like sediment building up over years, until I could no longer tell where I ended and the others began. I was allowed to leave the institute that evening. Charlotte was waiting for me at home, pacing the small parlor of our rented rooms, her face drawn with worry. I tried to reassure her, tried to tell her that everything had gone well, that I was fine, that we would soon have the money we needed, but I could not meet her eyes. I could not tell her about the roses, about Thomas, about the voices that now whispered at the edges of my consciousness. That night, I lay awake in my narrow bed, staring at the ceiling, feeling the presence of others inside my own mind. I knew things I should not know. I knew that somewhere in London, a woman named Catherine had lost a child named Thomas to scarlet fever 3 years ago. I knew that she still wept when she smelled roses because roses had covered his small coffin. I knew that she had volunteered for Dr. Thorne's study because she wanted to forget, to erase the memory of her son's death, to become someone new. And I knew that I was no longer entirely Eleanor Ashford, because Eleanor Ashford had never lost a child, had never stood in a garden weeping over roses, had never whispered Thomas's name in the darkness like a prayer or a curse. Dr. Thorne had opened a door inside my mind, and I did not yet know if it could ever be closed again. The memories came in waves over the following days, each one more insistent than the last. I would be pouring tea and suddenly remember the weight of a child in my arms, the softness of his hair against my cheek, the particular way he pronounced my name as Mama. I would be walking through the market and catch the scent of roses from a flower seller's cart and feel grief crash over me like cold water, so intense I had to stop and grip a lamppost to keep from falling. Charlotte noticed, of course. She watched me with growing concern as I forgot simple things, as I called her by names that were not hers, as I woke screaming in the night from dreams that were not my own. On the third day, she found me standing at the window, tears streaming down my face, though I could not tell her why I was weeping. She gripped my shoulders and demanded to know what they had done to me at the institute. I tried to explain. I told her about the memories, about the woman named Catherine, about the child Thomas. Charlotte listened with mounting horror, her face growing paler with each word. When I finished, she said we must go to the police, that I had been experimented upon without my consent, that Dr. Thorne must be stopped. But I found myself defending him, insisting that he had warned me there might be side effects, that I had agreed to participate, that the money would come soon, and we would be free of our debts. Even then, I was already changing. Eleanor Ashford, who had always been cautious and obedient, who had always deferred to her older sister's judgment, was becoming someone harder, someone more willing to take risks. I did not yet understand that this was not my own will strengthening, but Catherine's determination bleeding into my consciousness. Catherine, who had defied her family to marry for love. Catherine, who had fought the doctors when they wanted to give up on her dying son. Catherine, who had walked into the Thorne Institute seeking oblivion, and had instead become fragmented, dispersed, scattered across the minds of strangers. On the fourth day, I received a letter from the Institute. The handwriting was elegant, precise, unmistakably masculine. Dr. Thorne requested my presence at his earliest convenience to discuss the progression of my symptoms. He proposed a private consultation at the Institute that very afternoon. The letter was signed with his full name and title, but beneath the formal closing, he had added a single line in smaller script. "You are not losing your mind, Miss Ashford. Please come." Those words, that reassurance, meant more to me than I could express. I had begun to fear that I was going mad, that the memories were hallucinations, symptoms of some hereditary weakness of mind. My father's family had whispered about an aunt who had died in an asylum, though no one spoke of it directly. Perhaps it was my turn, I had thought in my darkest moments. Perhaps this is how it begins. But Dr. Thorne said I was not losing my mind. Dr. Thorne understood what was happening to me. Dr. Thorne could help. I told Charlotte I was going to collect the payment for my participation in the study. She wanted to accompany me, but I refused. Something in me, some instinct I did not yet recognize as Catherine's protective secrecy, insisted that I go alone. I dressed carefully that afternoon, choosing my best remaining dress, a deep blue wool that had been altered twice to accommodate our diminishing circumstances, but still maintained an air of dignity. I pinned up my hair, studying my reflection in the mirror, and for a moment I saw another woman's face superimposed over my own. Older, sadder, with eyes that had seen too much suffering. The fog had lifted slightly when I arrived at Harley Street, though the sky remained heavy with the promise of rain. The housekeeper admitted me immediately and led me not to the examination rooms on the second floor, but to a private study on the third. It was a different space entirely from the clinical sterility below, A room filled with books and specimen jars, with a fire burning in the grate and heavy curtains drawn against the gray afternoon. Dr. Thorne stood by the window, his back to me, his hands clasped behind him in an attitude of deep thought. He turned when I entered, and I saw that he looked tired, shadows beneath his eyes. His collar slightly loosened. He had been working, I realized, working late into the night, perhaps every night since the procedure. There was an intensity about him, a barely contained energy that seemed to vibrate in the air around him. "Miss Ashford," he said, "thank you for coming. Please, sit." He gestured to a leather chair near the fire. I sat, folding my hands in my lap, trying to project a calmness I did not feel. He took the chair opposite mine, leaning forward, his gray eyes fixed on my face with that same penetrating attention I had noticed before. "Tell me everything. Leave nothing out. I need to understand precisely what you are experiencing." And so I told him. I told him about Catherine and Thomas, about the garden and the roses, about the funeral with its small white coffin. I told him about the other fragments too, the ones that came from different sources, the dark bedroom, the carriage ride, the man's scarred hands, the blood on marble. As I spoke, his expression grew more focused, more intent. He did not interrupt, did not take notes, simply listened with an absorption that made me feel as though I were the only thing in the world that mattered. When I finished, he was silent for a long moment. Then he said, "You are experiencing memories from at least 3 different sources. The woman with the child, Catherine, she was one of our first test subjects, nearly a year ago. The bedroom scene and the carriage, those belong to a woman named Margaret, who participated 6 months ago. And the hands, the blood," he paused, his jaw tightening slightly, "those are mine." I stared at him. "Yours?" "I have tested the anesthetic on myself many times, Miss Ashford. I would not ask others to undergo something I have not experienced personally. The memories you are seeing, they are fragments of my own past, my own losses." He looked away, toward the fire, and in profile his face seemed carved from stone, beautiful and remote. I did not anticipate that the memory transfer would be bidirectional. I did not realize that in opening the channels between consciousnesses, I would be giving pieces of myself away, as well as collecting them. I felt something shift in my chest, a sensation that was not quite fear and not quite excitement. "You are collecting memories," I said slowly. "On purpose?" He met my eyes again, and I saw in his face a mixture of defiance and desperate hope. Project Orpheus was never about anesthesia, Miss Ashford. It was never about eliminating physical pain. It was about something far more profound. He stood and began to pace, his hands moving as he spoke, as though he could shape the air into understanding. The human mind is not a closed system. Consciousness is not confined to a single skull. We are, all of us, more connected than we realize, more permeable. What I have discovered, what I have spent 5 years developing, is a chemical compound that opens those channels deliberately, that allows memories, experiences, even aspects of personality to flow from one mind to another. But why? I asked. What purpose could such a thing serve? He stopped pacing and looked at me with an expression of such naked pain that I nearly looked away. Because memory is everything we are, Miss Ashford. Identity, self, soul, it is all built from memory. And if memories can be transferred, then nothing is truly lost. Not love, not knowledge, not even the people we have lost. He moved to his desk and opened a drawer, withdrawing a small daguerreotype in a silver frame. He held it for a moment, his thumb caressing the edge before handing it to me. I looked at the image. It showed a young woman in her 20s, beautiful in the way Victorian photographs allowed, with elaborate dark hair and eyes that seemed to look past the camera into some distant place. She wore a high-collared dress and held a spray of orange blossoms. A wedding portrait. My wife, Dr. Thorne said quietly. Vivian. She died 3 years ago, pneumonia. She was gone in less than a week. He took the daguerreotype back, staring at it as though he could will the image to life. When she died, I lost everything. Not just her presence, but all the small daily things that made her real to me. The way she laughed, the particular phrases she used, the memories we shared. They began to fade, Miss Ashford, and I could not bear it. I could not let her disappear completely from the world. So you are trying to preserve her, I said softly, to keep her alive through memory. Not just preserve, he said. He set the daguerreotype down and turned back to me, his eyes burning with intensity. To resurrect, to rebuild, piece by piece, memory by memory, until she exists again. Not in her own body that is lost, but in consciousness, in another mind, perhaps many minds. He took a step toward me. Do you understand what I am telling you, Miss Ashford? I am not conducting anesthetic experiments. I am attempting to reverse death itself. The implications of what he was saying began to unfold in my mind like dark flowers. The other women, I said, Catherine and Margaret and all the others, you have been giving them Vivian's memories. Only a few, he said. Small fragments, carefully curated, a favorite piece of music, the scent of a particular perfume, the view from the window of her childhood bedroom. But the process is imperfect. The memories scatter, mix, combine with the recipient's own experiences. Catherine's grief for her son has contaminated Vivian's recollections of gardens. Margaret's fear has warped Vivian's dreams. He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture of frustration. I need to refine the technique. I need to understand how to transfer complete intact memories without degradation, without loss. And you need more subjects, I said. More minds to work with. He looked at me steadily. Yes, I should have felt horror. I should have stood and walked out of that room and never returned. Any rational person would have done so. But I did not, because in that moment, I understood him. I understood the desperate mathematics of grief, the impossible bargain we would strike with fate if we could only bring back the ones we love. I thought of my father, dead these 2 months, buried in a grave I could barely afford to mark. I thought of all the things I would never hear him say again, all the moments we would never share. If someone had offered me a way to preserve him, to keep him alive in memory at least, would I not have taken it? Your wife, I heard myself say. Do you have her intact memories somewhere? The complete set? He nodded slowly. I began collecting them before she died, with her consent, while she was still well enough to understand and agree. We performed dozens of sessions over the months of her final illness. I have everything, Miss Ashford. Her childhood, her education, her courtship, our marriage, even the early stages of her illness. Everything that made Vivian who she was, I have preserved in chemical form, ready to be transferred. To whom? I asked, though I was beginning to suspect the answer. He moved to stand before me, looking down at me with an expression I could not read. To someone compatible. Someone young enough, healthy enough, intelligent enough to integrate the memories without losing her own sense of self. Someone willing to share her consciousness with another. You want to put your dead wife's memories inside someone's mind, I said, to make her live again in another woman's body, not to replace the woman who receives them, he said urgently. Never that. But to create a kind of, he searched for words, a kind of synthesis. 2 consciousnesses coexisting, supporting each other, each making the other more complete. You have felt it already, Miss Ashford. Catherine's strength, her determination, it has not weakened you. If anything, you are stronger for carrying her memories. I am not stronger, I said. I am confused, frightened. I do not know anymore which thoughts are mine and which are hers. But you will learn, he said. You will adapt. The human mind is remarkably resilient, remarkably flexible. We can contain multitudes, Miss Ashford. We can be more than one person and yet remain ourselves. He knelt before my chair, bringing his face level with mine. His gray eyes were intense, pleading. "Help me. Continue with the treatments. Let me give you Vivian's memories piece by piece, and help me understand how to make the transfer complete. You need the money. I can pay you more than we agreed. Far more. Enough to secure your future and your sister's. All I ask is that you let me teach you to carry my wife within your mind." I looked at him, this brilliant, half-mad man kneeling at my feet, and I felt something stir in my chest that was not Catherine's grief or Margaret's fear, but my own treacherous heart beginning to respond to him. He was dangerous, I knew that. What he was proposing was a violation of everything natural, everything sacred. To deliberately erase the boundaries of self, to invite another consciousness to share the space inside one's skull, it was madness. But it was also beautiful in its way. The idea that love could be so strong, so enduring, that it could survive even death itself. The idea that memory was not a prison of the past, but a bridge to something beyond it. "I will think about it," I told him. He stood, disappointment flickering across his face. "Of course. Take all the time you need. But Miss Ashford," he added as I rose to leave, "the memories you already carry, they will not fade. Whether you continue the treatments or not, you are already part of this. You are already carrying pieces of people who came before you. The question is not whether you will change, but whether you will have any say in how you change." Those words followed me home through the darkening streets, through the fog that had returned with evening, through the door of our rented rooms where Charlotte waited with questions I could not answer. That night, I lay awake again, but this time I did not fight the foreign memories. I let them come. I let Catherine's grief wash over me, let Margaret's fear curl around my heart, let the image of Dr. Thorne's scarred hands reaching through darkness guide me toward understanding, and I realized that he was right. I was already changed, already no longer entirely myself. The only question remaining was how far I was willing to go, and whether I would lose Eleanor Ashford entirely in the process of becoming someone, something else. The next morning, I wrote to Dr. Thorne and told him I would continue the treatments. The second treatment took place on a grey afternoon when December had already begun to settle its cold hand over London. I arrived at the Institute alone, having told Charlotte I was meeting with a potential employer, a lie that came more easily than it should have. She had grown suspicious of my frequent absences, of the way I sometimes paused mid-sentence as though listening to voices she could not hear. I knew I should tell her the truth, but how could I explain what I myself barely understood? Dr. Thorne met me in the entrance hall himself, rather than sending the housekeeper. He looked as though he had not slept, his collar askew, his eyes bright with exhaustion and something else. Something that might have been hope or might have been fever. He took my hand in both of his, a gesture that would have been too familiar from any other man, but felt natural, necessary, between us. "Thank you," he said quietly. "Thank you for trusting me." I followed him upstairs, not to the clinical examination rooms, but to a different space entirely, a small chamber fitted more like a parlor than a medical facility. There was a chaise longue upholstered in deep green velvet, a table with a lamp that cast a warm glow, and on the walls, paintings of pastoral scenes that reminded me of somewhere I had never been, but somehow recognized. Dr. Thorne saw me looking at them and said, "Vivian's favorite landscapes, the countryside near her childhood home in Derbyshire." She painted the smaller one herself. I moved closer to examine the painting, a watercolor of a stone bridge over a narrow stream, trees heavy with summer leaves. The brushwork was delicate, skilled. I could almost hear the water moving over rocks, could almost smell the green dampness of that distant place. And then I realized I was not imagining it. I was remembering it. The cool stones beneath my bare feet as I waded in the stream. The way my dress had gotten wet and my governess had scolded me. The taste of wild strawberries picked from the hedgerow on the walk home. "These are not my memories," I said aloud, still staring at the painting. "No," Dr. Thorne said softly. "They are hers. But they are becoming yours as well. That is how it works, Miss Ashford. Slowly at first, and then faster, until you cannot tell where she ends and you begin." I turned to face him. "Is that what you want? For me to become her?" His expression was complex, unreadable. "I want her to live again. Whether that means she lives through you, or beside you, or as some new synthesis of both, I do not yet know. But I will not lie to you, Miss Ashford. With each treatment, you will become less purely yourself and more something hybrid, something that has never existed before. If that frightens you, if you wish to stop, tell me now, and I will pay you what we agreed, and you need never return." I should have said yes. I should have taken the money and fled. But instead, I moved to the chaise longue and lay down upon it, arranging my skirts, tilting my head back against the cushioned arm. "I am not afraid," I told him. It was a lie, but it was also the truth. I was terrified and exhilarated in equal measure, standing on the edge of an abyss and choosing to step forward into the darkness. Dr. Thorne prepared the injection with steady hands, though I noticed a slight tremor in his fingers as he drew the amber liquid from its vial. "This dose is stronger than the last," he said. "More concentrated. You will experience deeper memory integration, more complete absorption of Vivian's consciousness. When you wake, you may find it difficult to separate your own identity from hers. The confusion will pass. But for a few hours, or perhaps a few days, you may feel as though you are two people occupying the same space." He knelt beside the chaise and looked at me with an intensity that made my breath catch. "I need you to understand something, Miss Ashford. Once we proceed beyond this point, there is no going back. The changes will be permanent. You will carry Vivian with you for the rest of your life. Are you certain this is what you want?" I met his gaze and found myself saying words I had not planned, words that rose from some deep place within me that might have been Eleanor or might have been the ghost of Vivian already stirring in my mind. "I am certain. I want to know her. I want to understand what it means to be loved by you." Something flickered in his eyes, shock perhaps, or recognition. Then he turned away and prepared my arm for the injection. "You will," he said quietly. "God help us both. You will." The needle entered my vein, and the world began to dissolve around me, but this time I did not sink into darkness. Instead, I fell upward, into light, into a cascade of images and sensations that came so fast and so complete that I could not tell where the treatment room ended and the memories began. I was 9 years old, running through fields of wheat on my father's estate in Derbyshire, my hair loose and wild, my dress torn from climbing trees. I was 16, dancing at my first proper ball, feeling the eyes of young men on me, and knowing I was beautiful, knowing I had power. I was 20, meeting Sebastian Thorne for the first time at a lecture on advances in surgical technique, drawn to his brilliant mind and the sadness in his eyes. I was 22, standing in a church in my wedding dress, orange blossoms in my hair, promising to love him until death parted us, never imagining how soon that would come. I was Sebastian's wife, and I knew him in ways Eleanor Ashford had never known any man. I knew the taste of his mouth, the weight of his body against mine in the darkness. I knew his fears, his ambitions, his terrible guilt over the patients he could not save. I knew how he wept in private over failures, how he drove himself with relentless intensity, how he sought in science what he could not find in faith, a way to undo what death had done. I felt Vivian's love for him, complete and consuming, the kind of love that women of my class were taught to feel only moderately, carefully, with proper restraint. But Vivian had loved without restraint, had given herself to him entirely, body and soul and mind. And now I was feeling that love as though it were my own, as though my heart could hold both Eleanor's cautious attraction and Vivian's passionate certainty. I was dying. I was lying in a bed in this very building, in a room above us, breathing through lungs that were filling with fluid, feeling Sebastian's hand gripping mine so tightly it hurt. I was watching him beg me not to leave him, watching him promise he would find a way to bring me back, and I was trying to tell him to let me go, to live his life, to find happiness again. But I could not speak. My voice was gone. All I could do was squeeze his hand and hope he understood. And then I was somewhere else, somewhere beyond death, though I did not think Vivian had believed in any afterlife. I was scattered, fragmented, dispersed across months and minds. I was in Catherine's head, watching through her eyes as she held her dying son. I was in Margaret's thoughts as she fled from a husband who beat her. I was in a dozen other women, brief flashes of consciousness, moments of recognition before the darkness claimed me again. I realized with horror that this was what Vivienne had become after death. Not gone, not vanished, but broken into pieces and scattered among the women Sebastian had experimented upon, each one carrying a fragment of his dead wife, none of them knowing what they held. He had been trying to gather her, to collect all the scattered pieces and reassemble her consciousness like a puzzle. And I was meant to be the vessel for that reassembly, the mind strong enough or desperate enough to hold all of Sebastian Thorne and still remain Eleanor Ashford. But could any mind hold two complete people? Or would one have to yield, to fade, to become the ghost while the other lived? I woke with tears streaming down my face, though I did not know if I was crying for Eleanor or for Vivian or for the impossible grief of loving someone so much that you would tear apart the natural order to have them back. Dr. Thorne was there, his hand on my forehead, his face pale and strained. He was saying my name, Eleanor, Eleanor, come back, but I could not tell which Eleanor he meant, the one who had entered this room or the one who was meant to remain after Vivienne took her place. I sat up slowly, the room spinning around me. My body felt strange, familiar and foreign at once. I looked down at my hands and saw them as if for the first time. Small hands, younger than Vivian's had been, with shorter fingers and no wedding ring. I touched my face and felt features that were mine but also not mine, a younger face, softer, less marked by time, but now carrying memories of years I had not lived. How long was I under? I asked. My voice sounded different to my own ears. 40 minutes, Dr. Thorne said. He helped me sit up fully, his hands careful on my shoulders. How do you feel? Do you know who you are? I considered the question. I am Eleanor Ashford, I said slowly. And I am also Sebastian Thorne. I am 24 and I am 27. I am alive and I am dead. I looked at him and felt a confusion of emotions, Eleanor's tentative attraction and Vivian's deep, abiding love, tangled together until I could not separate them. I am in love with you, I said. Or she is, or we both are. I do not know any more. He closed his eyes, his jaw tightening. This is what I feared, he said. The emotional memories are the strongest, the most persistent. Vivian's feelings for me, they will be difficult for you to distinguish from your own developing feelings. You must understand, Miss Ashford, that what you are experiencing is not real. It is borrowed. It belongs to someone else. But if I feel it, I said, if it lives in my heart and shapes my thoughts and makes me long for you when you are not near, how is it not real? What is the difference between a feeling that originates in my own experience and one that has been given to me by someone else? Both exist in the same mind, both move the same heart. He opened his eyes and looked at me with such anguish that I wanted to reach for him, to comfort him, to promise him that everything would be all right, even though I knew it would not. The difference, he said hoarsely, is that one is yours to keep, and one I have stolen from you by giving you hers. I stood, shakily, testing my legs. The room steadied around me. I could feel both women inside me now, Eleanor and Vivian, their thoughts running parallel, sometimes merging, sometimes diverging. Eleanor wanted to leave, to run from this place and never return. Vivian wanted to stay, to help Sebastian with his impossible task, to be reborn even if it meant consuming another woman's identity in the process. And I, whoever I was becoming, wanted both and neither. "I need to go home," I said. "I need time to think." Dr. Thorne nodded. He walked me down to the entrance hall and helped me with my coat, his hands lingering on my shoulders for just a moment too long. Before I stepped out into the cold December evening, he said, "Miss Ashford, Eleanor, if this is too much, if you want to stop, please tell me. I do not want to destroy you in my attempt to resurrect her." I looked back at him, standing in the doorway of his institute, backlit by the warm glow of gas lamps, and I saw him as both women saw him. Eleanor saw a handsome, troubled man who had made her feel things she had never felt before, who had offered her money when she needed it most, and asked in return only that she be brave. Vivian saw her husband, her love, the man she had promised to cherish forever, the man she had died leaving behind. Both of us wanted him. Both of us feared him. "I will return for the next treatment," I told him. And I walked away into the fog before he could answer, before I could change my mind, before Eleanor could wrestle back control from Vivian's determined ghost. The walk home took longer than it should have. I kept pausing, disoriented by streets I both knew and did not know, by memories that told me to turn left here because there used to be a bookshop I loved, except that Eleanor had never been to that bookshop, and it had closed 2 years before I was born. I was experiencing Vivian's London overlaid on Eleanor's, 2 cities occupying the same space, 2 lives unfolding in parallel within one mind. Charlotte was waiting when I finally reached our rooms. She took one look at my face and demanded to know what had happened. I tried to lie, tried to tell her I was merely tired, but she gripped my arms and shook me gently and said, "Eleanor, you are not yourself. Something is wrong. Tell me what they are doing to you at that place." And so I told her. I told her everything, about the memories, about Vivian, about Sebastian's desperate attempt to bring his wife back from death by rebuilding her consciousness inside another woman's mind. Charlotte listened in growing horror, her face white, her hands trembling. When I finished, she said, "You must stop this immediately. This is madness. He is destroying you." "But I am not being destroyed," I said, and I was surprised to find I believed it. I am being expanded, changed, made into something more than I was. Is that not what we all seek? To become more than ourselves? "Not like this," Charlotte whispered. "Not by erasing who you are and replacing yourself with someone dead." She gripped my hands. "Please, Eleanor, come away with me. We will find another way to manage our debts. You do not have to sacrifice yourself for this." I pulled away from her. I am not sacrificing myself. I am choosing this. There is a difference. But even as I said it, I wondered if it was true. Was I choosing, or was Vivian choosing for me, using Eleanor's voice to speak her own desires? And if I could not tell the difference, did it matter? That night I dreamed I was in Sebastian's arms, but I did not know if I was Eleanor dreaming of Vivian's memories or Vivian dreaming through Eleanor's sleeping mind. In the dream, he held me and whispered, "Come back to me, my love, come back." And I said, "I am here. I have always been here. I will never leave you again." When I woke, I was sobbing, and I did not know whose grief was drowning me. I returned to the Institute 3 more times over the course of December, and with each treatment I felt Eleanor Ashford slipping further away, like sand through fingers, like a name half forgotten. By the winter solstice, I could no longer remember what my mother's face had looked like. But I could recall with perfect clarity the scent of Vivian's wedding bouquet and the exact shade of blue Sebastian had worn when he proposed to her on a rainy afternoon in Hyde Park. I was losing myself piece by piece, and the terrible thing was that I did not entirely mind. Charlotte watched me changing with helpless horror. She tried once to prevent me from going to the institute, standing between me and the door with tears streaming down her face, begging me to stay, to fight, to remember who I was. But I simply stepped around her and kept walking. Eleanor would have stopped, would have comforted her sister, would have felt guilt for causing her pain. Vivienne had been an only child and did not understand the obligations of sisterhood. I was becoming more Vivienne with each passing day. The treatments grew longer and more intense. Sebastian would sit beside me as I lay on the green chaise, holding my hand, speaking in a low voice about memories he wanted to transfer. "Tell me about the summer we spent in Bath," he would say. "Tell me about the night we attended the lecture on electromagnetic theory. Tell me what you were thinking when you realized you were dying." And I would answer, sometimes in Eleanor's voice and sometimes in Vivienne's, recounting things I had never experienced as though I had lived them myself. Other women came and went from the institute during those weeks, but I rarely saw them. Sebastian kept me separate, private, as though I were something precious that might be damaged by contact with others. But once, waiting in the entrance hall while he prepared my treatment, I encountered a young woman with red hair and hollow eyes who gripped my arm with desperate strength. "You are the one," she whispered, "the one he is building her in. I can feel it when I sleep. She is leaving us, all the scattered pieces, and flowing into you. Tell him to stop. Tell him we want to be free." Before I could answer, the housekeeper appeared and led the woman away, murmuring soothing platitudes about rest and medication. But her words stayed with me, echoing in my mind alongside all the other voices that now crowded my thoughts. I began to understand what Sebastian had done, the true scope of it. He had not simply preserved Vivienne's memories in chemical form. He had been testing, refining, distributing fragments of her consciousness among dozens of women over the past 3 years, waiting for the right vessel to appear, someone who could hold all the pieces and synthesize them into something approaching resurrection. I was that vessel. And the other women, Catherine and Margaret and the red-haired stranger and all the others whose names I did not know, they were suffering because they had been used as storage, as repositories for pieces of Vivienne they did not want and could not integrate. They were haunted by a dead woman's memories, driven half-mad by thoughts and feelings that did not belong to them. And Sebastian had done this to them deliberately, coldly, in service of his obsession with bringing his wife back. I should have been horrified. Eleanor would have been. But Vivienne understood. Vivienne had known what Sebastian was capable of when she married him, had loved him precisely because he was willing to defy every boundary of science and ethics and common decency to achieve his goals. She had even consented to his early experiments, had let him map her consciousness while she was still alive, had told him with her dying breath to use what he had learned, to continue the work, to find a way to make death meaningless. I found myself alone with Sebastian one evening in late December, after the day's treatment, in his study with snow falling outside the window and the fire burning low. He had been giving me stronger doses with each session, accelerating the integration, and I knew he was racing against time, against his own fear that I might stop coming, that Eleanor might reassert herself and refuse to continue. I sat in the leather chair that had become familiar, almost mine, and watched him pour brandy into 2 glasses with hands that trembled slightly. "You are almost complete," he said without looking at me. "I can see her in your eyes now, in the way you move, the way you speak. Another treatment, perhaps 2, and the integration will be total." "And Eleanor?" I asked. "What happens to her?" He turned then, his gray eyes meeting mine with painful honesty. "I do not know. In theory, both consciousnesses should be able to coexist, should be able to share the same mind without one destroying the other. But in practice," he paused, "in practice, The stronger personality tends to dominate. Vivian was always stronger than Eleanor, more certain of herself, more forceful. I suspect that when the process is complete, you will be primarily Vivian with only traces of Eleanor remaining. Small quirks, perhaps, a fondness for things Eleanor loved that Vivian did not, but the core identity will be hers. He said this calmly, as though he were describing a surgical procedure rather than the murder of one woman's self to resurrect another. I felt Eleanor stir inside me, felt her fear and anger, but she was weak now, muffled, like someone shouting from a great distance. Vivian was the one who spoke when I opened my mouth. "That is what you want," I said. "Not a synthesis, not a hybrid. You want your wife back exactly as she was, wearing someone else's body." "Yes," he admitted. He moved to stand before me, setting down his glass, taking my hands in his. "God forgive me, yes. I want you, Vivienne. I want you alive again. I do not care what it costs, what it takes, who I have to sacrifice. I want you back." "And what if I do not want to come back?" I said, and I was not entirely certain which one of us was speaking. What if Eleanor does not want to die? What if Vivian does not want to steal another woman's life? He flinched as though I had struck him. "Then you would stop coming to the institute. You would refuse the treatments. But you have not refused. You have come willingly every time I have called. If that is not consent, I do not know what is." I pulled my hands from his and stood, moving to the window, watching the snow fall through the darkness. Is it consent if I am no longer entirely myself? If the woman who keeps agreeing to this is already more Vivian than Eleanor? "You have been manipulating me from the beginning, Sebastian. You chose me because I was desperate, because I needed money, because I was vulnerable enough to agree to something no rational person would accept, and then you used your chemicals to erase my objections, to replace my will with hers. How is that different from any other form of violation?" He was quiet for a long time. When he finally spoke, his voice was hoarse. "You are right. You are absolutely right. What I have done is monstrous. I have destroyed dozens of women in pursuit of this resurrection. I have turned them into receptacles for my dead wife's consciousness without their informed consent. I have driven some of them to madness and others to despair, and now I am completing the process by erasing you, Eleanor Ashford, so that Vivian can live in your place." He moved behind me, not touching, but close enough that I could feel the heat of him through my dress. "I am a monster, I know this, but I cannot stop. I love her too much to let her stay dead." I turned to face him, and in that moment I was both women fully, Eleanor and Vivian occupying the same space, speaking with one voice. "I love you," I said. "Both of us do. That is the cruelest part of what you have done. You have made two women love you, and now one of us must die so the other can have you." His face crumpled then, his careful control breaking. He reached for me, and I went to him, let him pull me against his chest, felt him bury his face in my hair. "I am sorry," he whispered against my scalp. "I am so sorry. I should never have started this. I should have let her go, should have grieved like a normal man and moved on with my life. But I could not. I could not bear a world without her in it." We stood there in the firelight, holding each other, and I did not know if he was embracing Eleanor or Vivian or some impossible combination of both. I felt his heart beating against my cheek, felt his hands on my back, and I remembered this, remembered being held by him as Vivian, remembered the particular way he fit against me, the scent of him, the steadiness of him. But I also felt Eleanor's wonder, her first experience of being held by a man she desired, the strangeness and rightness of it. "Sebastian," I said against his chest, "there is something I need to tell you." "Anything," he said. "The other women, the ones you used to store Vivian's memories, they are suffering. They are haunted by pieces of her that do not belong to them. One of them spoke to me today, begged me to tell you to stop. You are torturing them to bring your wife back. He stiffened, but did not pull away. I know, he said quietly. I have always known. That is part of the monstrosity of what I have done. I chose to cause suffering to others to relieve my own suffering. I told myself it was justified, that they were being compensated, that the advance of scientific knowledge was worth some temporary discomfort. But they are not suffering temporarily, are they? The memories I gave them will never fade. They will carry pieces of Vivian for the rest of their lives, whether they want to or not. Can you take them back? I asked. Can you remove what you gave them and place it all in me instead? He pulled back to look at me, his eyes searching my face. Theoretically, yes, but it would require one final treatment, a massive dose that would transfer everything at once. Every fragment of Vivian that I scattered among the others would be extracted and consolidated in your mind. It would be, he hesitated, it would be almost certainly fatal to Eleanor. The shock of absorbing so much consciousness at once would overwhelm whatever remains of her identity. You would wake as Vivian, fully and completely, with perhaps only the faintest shadow of Eleanor left behind. I felt Eleanor inside me then, stronger than she had been in days, fighting her way to the surface. She was terrified, desperate, pleading with me not to agree, not to let Vivian erase her entirely. But Vivian was stronger, had always been stronger. And she wanted what she had always wanted, to live, to love, to be with Sebastian again, no matter the cost. I looked at the man I loved, the man both of us loved, and I made a choice that was both women's and neither's. Do it, I said. Perform the final treatment. Take the memories from the others and give them all to me. Let Eleanor die so that Vivian can live, and let those other women be free of the burden you placed upon them. Sebastian's expression was anguished, torn. Are you certain? Once I begin the procedure, there will be no stopping it. No reversing it. Eleanor Ashford will cease to exist. I am already ceasing to exist, I told him. Every day I become less myself and more her. At least this way, the ending will be quick and Eleanor will not have to watch herself disappear piece by piece. And the others, Catherine and Margaret and all the rest, they will be whole again. Is that not worth one life? Even as I said it, I felt Eleanor screaming inside me, felt her rage and betrayal, felt her trying to seize control of our shared body and run from this place. But I was stronger now. Vivienne was stronger, and so I stood there in Sebastian's study, in the firelight, in the falling snow, and I sentenced Eleanor Ashford to death so that Sebastian Thorne could be reborn. Sebastian kissed me then, desperately, and I did not know which woman he was kissing or which woman was kissing him back. Perhaps it no longer mattered. Perhaps we had already become what he intended us to be. Not Eleanor, not Vivienne, but something new, something that could only exist in the space where two souls met and merged and became inseparable. We will do it tomorrow, he said against my lips. Christmas Eve. I will gather the others, all the women who carry pieces of Vivian. I will extract what I gave them and transfer it all to you in one final treatment. And then, he pulled back to look at me, his eyes wet, and then you will be complete. You will be hers. You will be mine. I nodded, unable to speak, feeling Eleanor's anguish like a knife in my heart. But I did not change my mind, could not change my mind. Vivian had waited 3 years to live again, and she would not let anyone, not even the innocent woman whose body she was stealing, stand in her way. I left the institute that evening knowing I would not return as Eleanor Ashford. When I came back tomorrow, it would be for the last time, for the final transformation, for the death of one woman and the resurrection of another. I walked home through the snowy streets, feeling Eleanor weeping inside me, and I whispered to her silently, I am sorry. I am so sorry. But love is stronger than mercy, And Sebastian's love for Vivienne is stronger than anything, even death, even justice, even you. Charlotte was waiting when I arrived home, as she always was. She looked at my face and knew immediately that something had changed. "Tomorrow," I told her. "Tomorrow it ends. Tomorrow I will either come home as someone else, or I will not come home at all." She did not argue this time, did not beg. She simply held me while I cried, Eleanor's tears falling from Vivienne's eyes, two women mourning the same loss in different ways. And in the morning, when I prepared to leave for the Institute one final time, Charlotte pressed a locket into my hand, a small silver thing that had belonged to our mother. "Remember," she whispered, "no matter what he does to you, no matter whose memories he fills you with, remember that you are my sister. Remember that you are Eleanor. Remember that you were loved for who you are, not for who someone else wanted you to become." I closed my fingers around the locket and kissed her cheek, and I did not have the heart to tell her that it was already too late, that Eleanor was already gone, that the woman walking out the door into the Christmas Eve snow was someone she had never known and would never know again. Behind me, I heard Charlotte sobbing. Ahead of me, the Institute waited, and Sebastian and Vivienne's final resurrection. And inside me, Eleanor Ashford screamed one last time before the darkness came to claim her forever. The final treatment room was different from all the others, a surgical theater on the top floor of the Institute with a domed glass ceiling that let in the pale winter light. I walked through the door on Christmas Eve morning and knew I was walking toward my own execution, though whether it was Eleanor's death or Vivienne's second one, I could no longer say. Sebastian had gathered them all, the women who had carried fragments of Vivienne these long months and years. They sat in chairs arranged in a circle around a central table fitted with leather restraints, their faces hollow with exhaustion and haunted recognition. I saw Catherine, the mother who had lost her son. I saw Margaret, who had fled a violent marriage. I saw the red-haired woman who had gripped my arm in warning. I saw a dozen others, some young, some older, all of them marked by the same expression of weary suffering, all of them carrying pieces of a dead woman they had never chosen to know. When I entered, they turned to look at me with a mixture of resentment and relief. "You are the one," Catherine said, her voice flat, "the one who will take her from us." "Yes," I said, "I am sorry for what was done to you, for what I am about to take." "Do not apologize," Margaret said bitterly. "Just finish it. Take her, and let us be ourselves again." Sebastian moved among them with glass syringes, drawing blood from each woman in turn, collecting the chemical traces of Vivienne's memories that he had implanted in their minds. The process was intimate, invasive, a violation repeated one final time. Some of them wept as he worked. Others sat in stony silence. All of them watched me with eyes that said, "You are complicit in this. You chose to be the vessel. You are as guilty as he is." They were right, of course. I had chosen this. Eleanor had needed the money, yes, but I had kept returning long after the debt was paid, kept accepting the treatments, kept letting Vivienne grow stronger inside me until she was all I could hear. I had collaborated in my own erasure because some part of me, some desperate, lonely part, had wanted to be chosen, to be important, to be loved as completely as Sebastian had loved his wife. When Sebastian had collected blood from all of them, he came to me. I lay down on the central table, letting him fasten the restraints around my wrists and ankles. "This is necessary," he said quietly. "The convulsions during the integration will be severe. I do not want you to hurt yourself." The other women formed a circle around me, witnessing, waiting for their freedom. Sebastian prepared the final injection, combining all the blood he had collected into a single massive dose, amber liquid shimmering in the winter light that fell through the glass dome above us. He stood over me with the syringe, and for the first time since I had known him, I saw doubt in his face, saw him hesitate. Vivienne, he said softly. Eleanor, whoever you are, I need you to understand what will happen. When I administer this dose, every fragment of Vivienne's consciousness that exists in these women will flow into you. You will receive 3 years of scattered memories all at once. The shock will be, he paused, it will be catastrophic. Your sense of self will shatter. You may not survive the integration. And if you do survive, you will wake as someone entirely different from who you were when you entered this room. I know, I said. Both of us knew. Eleanor and Vivienne, speaking together one final time. We choose this. He bent and kissed my forehead, a gesture so tender it broke my heart. Forgive me, he whispered. Then he inserted the needle into my vein and pressed the plunger, and the world exploded into pieces. I was everyone at once. I was Catherine holding her dying son, feeling his small body grow cold in my arms. I was Margaret cowering from her husband's fists, tasting blood in my mouth. I was the red-haired woman, whose name was Anna, standing at the edge of a bridge and contemplating the dark water below. I was a governess named Sarah, who had fallen in love with her employer and been dismissed when he discovered it. I was a widow named Grace, who had poisoned her husband and lived in terror of discovery. I was a seamstress, a lady's maid, a shopkeeper's daughter, a fallen woman, a mad woman, a ghost. I was all of them and none of them, and beneath it all, I was Vivienne, whole and complete for the first time since her death, gathering all her scattered pieces back into a single consciousness. I felt her memories flooding in, overwhelming everything else. Her childhood in Derbyshire, her education in France, her debut in London society, her courtship with Sebastian, their wedding night, their 3 years of marriage, every moment of joy and sorrow and passion and quiet companionship, her illness, her slow dying, her final thoughts as the darkness closed in. I love you. Remember me. Find me again. And Sebastian had found her, had spent 3 years searching, experimenting, destroying other women's lives to bring her back, had finally succeeded in gathering all the pieces and placing them in a single vessel strong enough to hold them. I was Sebastian Thorne, and I was alive again, and I was whole. But I was also Eleanor Ashford, and I was dying, drowning beneath the weight of too many memories, too many lives, too many selves trying to occupy the same small space. I felt myself fragmenting, dissolving, losing the boundaries that had defined me. My childhood with Charlotte, my father's death, my desperate need for money, my first sight of Sebastian, my choice to continue the treatments. All of it was being crushed beneath Vivienne's stronger, older, more completely realized identity. And then something unexpected happened. In the moment before Eleanor disappeared entirely, I felt all the other women reach for me, not with their hands, but with their minds, with the pieces of themselves they had preserved, despite carrying Vivienne's memories. Catherine's love for her son, Margaret's determination to survive, Anna's desperate hope, Sarah's capacity for forgiveness, Grace's terrible guilt and longing for redemption. They poured themselves into me, not Vivienne, not Eleanor, but into the space between us, into the place where two consciousnesses met and merged. And in that meeting, that merging, something new was born. Not Vivienne resurrected, not Eleanor erased, but a third thing, a synthesis, a woman who carried all of our memories and all of our pain and all of our love, and who was somehow more than any of us had been alone. I woke screaming, my body arcing against the restraints, and Sebastian was there, calling my name, except he did not know which name to call. Vivienne? Eleanor? The answer was both, and neither. I was someone who had never existed before, someone who could only exist because a dozen women had been violated and used and broken, and then in our brokenness had found a way to create something that was not just one resurrected woman, but a community of consciousness, a choir of voices speaking in harmony. Sebastian released the restraints with shaking hands. "Who are you?" he asked, his voice breaking. "Are you her? Are you my wife?" I sat up slowly, testing my body, my mind, my fragmented and reforming sense of self. I looked at him with eyes that saw him as Vivian had seen him, and as Eleanor had seen him, and as a dozen other women had seen men they loved or feared or needed. "I am Vivian," I said, "and I am Eleanor. And I am Catherine and Margaret and Anna and all the others whose memories you stole and scattered and tried to use for your own purposes. I am what you made when you broke the boundaries between minds and thought you could control the result." His face went white. "That is not what I intended. I wanted only Vivian. I wanted my wife back." "I know," I said, and I felt a complex emotion that was part Vivian's love for him and part Eleanor's compassion and part fury from all the women he had used. "But you cannot bring back the dead, Sebastian. You can only create new forms of life from the wreckage of what came before. And that is what you have done. I am not your wife resurrected. I am something else entirely. Something that includes her, but is not limited to her." I stood, shakily, and looked around at the circle of women. They were staring at me with expressions of wonder and relief and recognition. The fragments of Vivian were gone from them, drawn into me during the final treatment. But something of their own selves, their own strength, had come with those fragments and changed what I became. They had refused to be merely vessels, merely storage containers for a dead woman's consciousness. They had insisted on their own existence, their own value, and in doing so had transformed Sebastian's resurrection into something he had never anticipated. "You are free now," I told them. "The pieces of her that you carried, they are mine now. You can return to your lives, to yourselves, without her haunting you." "Thank you," Catherine said, tears streaming down her face, "and I am sorry. Sorry that you had to carry all of us." I shook my head. "I chose this. Perhaps not Eleanor, not at first, but as I became more Vivian, I chose it. And now I carry all of you willingly as witnesses, as proof that what was done to us cannot be undone, but can be transformed into something new." The women began to leave, one by one, walking out of the surgical theater into the Christmas Eve afternoon, into their own lives, finally free. Sebastian and I were left alone in the fading light, two people who had loved each other in one life and destroyed each other in attempting to recreate that love in another. "What happens now?" he asked. "What do I do with you? What do we become?" I felt all the voices inside me considering that question. Vivian wanted to stay with him, to resume their marriage as though death had been merely an interruption. Eleanor wanted to return to Charlotte, to salvage what remained of that relationship. The others had various opinions, various needs, various dreams of what this strange new life might hold. But the decision was mine, or ours, or whatever this collective consciousness had become. I looked at Sebastian, this brilliant, broken man who had loved too much and violated too many in service of that love, and I felt something that might have been forgiveness, or might have been grief, or might have been both. "I am going home," I said, "to Charlotte." She loved Eleanor, and Eleanor still exists inside me, alongside Vivian and all the others. She deserves to know that her sister survived, even if she survived by becoming something more than a sister, something strange and multiple and impossible to name. "And me?" Sebastian asked. "What becomes of us?" I took his hand, this hand I remembered holding as Vivian, this hand Eleanor had longed to touch, this hand that had destroyed and created in equal measure. "I do not know," I said, honestly. "Perhaps in time, when I have learned to be this new self, when I have integrated all these voices into something coherent, perhaps then we can find a way to be together that does not require anyone's erasure or death. But not now, not yet. You need to understand what you have done, Sebastian. You need to grieve for real, not try to reverse death through violation of the living." He nodded, tears sliding down his face. "I have been a monster." "Yes," I agreed. But you have also created something extraordinary, even if it was not what you intended. You have proven that consciousness is not singular, not bounded, not limited to a single body or a single life. You have shown that we can contain multitudes, that we can be more than ourselves. That knowledge will either save you or destroy you. The choice is yours. I left him there in the surgical theater, standing alone beneath the glass dome as snow began to fall through the darkening sky. I walked down through the institute, past the examination rooms and the recovery rooms and all the spaces where women had been made into instruments of a dead woman's resurrection. I walked out into Christmas Eve, into the cold and the snow and the gaslit streets of London, carrying inside me a dozen lives, a dozen loves, a dozen ways of seeing the world. Charlotte was waiting when I reached our rooms. She took one look at my face and knew immediately that something fundamental had changed. "You are not Eleanor," she said. "Not entirely." "No," I admitted, "but Eleanor is still here. She is part of what I have become. And she wants you to know that she loves you, that she is sorry for leaving, that she hopes you can learn to love this new version of her that includes so much more than the sister you knew." Charlotte studied me for a long moment. Then she opened her arms, and I went to her, and we held each other while the snow fell outside and Christmas bells rang in the distance. She was crying, and I was crying, and I did not know if the tears were Eleanor's or Vivian's or Catherine's or belonged to someone else entirely. Perhaps it did not matter. Perhaps tears are the same in any language, from any life, in any consciousness that has known love and loss. "I am still your sister," I told her. Just a sister who is also many other things. A wife, a mother, a survivor, a ghost, a resurrection. All of them and none of them and something new that has no name yet. "Then I will love all of you," Charlotte said fiercely. "Every piece, every voice, every woman you have become." And so she did. We made a life together, Charlotte and this strange composite self I had become. We found new rooms in a different part of London, away from the debts and the memories. We told people I was Eleanor Ashford, recovered from a long illness, changed but present. Some days that was more true than others. Some days Eleanor was the strongest voice, and I moved through the world as the woman Charlotte remembered. Other days, Vivian dominated, and I found myself longing for Sebastian with an intensity that frightened me. And some days, I was everyone at once, a cacophony of voices and memories and desires. And on those days, Charlotte would sit with me and hold my hand and remind me to breathe, to stay grounded, to not lose myself entirely in the multiplicity. Sebastian wrote to me occasionally, letters that were part love letter and part scientific report, tracking his attempts to understand what he had created. He had stopped his experiments, he told me, had closed the institute and devoted himself to documenting what he had learned, to publishing his findings in medical journals that largely refused to believe him. He was becoming an outcast in the scientific community, a madman who claimed to have transferred consciousness between bodies, who spoke of multiple selves inhabiting single minds. His reputation was destroyed, his career ended. But he said he deserved no less. I wrote back, sometimes as Vivian, sometimes as Eleanor, sometimes as this nameless synthesis of all of us. I told him about my life, about the strange joy of containing multitudes, about the difficulty and beauty of being more than one person. I told him I forgave him, though I was not certain that was true, not certain any of us had the right to forgive what he had done. But I told him anyway, because he needed to hear it, and because Vivian loved him still, and love is stronger than judgment, stronger even than justice. Years passed. Charlotte married eventually, a kind man who accepted without fully understanding that her sister was strange, multiple, touched by something beyond the normal boundaries of self. I attended the wedding, wearing a dress that Eleanor had chosen, and Vivian had approved, and I danced with the groom and felt happy for them with all the voices inside me joining in that happiness. Sebastian never married again. He lived alone with his research and his guilt, and his memories of what he had done. We saw each other occasionally, careful meetings in public places where we could speak of science and philosophy and the nature of consciousness without the weight of all that had passed between us crushing us entirely. On those occasions, he would look at me and ask the question he had asked that Christmas Eve in the surgical theater: "Who are you?" And I would give him the same answer, the only answer that had ever been true. "I am everyone you made me, and no one you intended. I am the price of trying to reverse death, the cost of loving too much, the consequence of believing that consciousness can be controlled and contained and resurrected at will. I am Eleanor Ashford, who needed money and found obliteration. I am Sebastian Thorne, who died and was scattered and slowly gathered back into a strange new form. I am Catherine and Margaret, and Anna and Sarah and Grace, and all the others whose lives were violated in service of one man's grief. I am the testament to what happens when we try to undo what cannot be undone, when we try to bring back what must stay lost. I am alive, impossibly, multiply, completely. I am the woman who died and the woman who died again, and the woman who was never allowed to live. I am the synthesis of a dozen broken hearts, a choir of voices, a community of consciousness that should not exist, but does. I am what love creates when it refuses to accept death, and I am the price we pay for that refusal. I am the resurrection and the grave, the beginning and the ending, the one and the many. I am, finally and forever, myself, all of myselves. And I carry them with me into whatever future awaits us, this impossible family of strangers who have become one, this woman who is women, this consciousness that contains multitudes and somehow, miraculously, remains whole. The snow falls outside my window now as I write this, Christmas Eve once more, years after the treatment that unmade and remade me. Charlotte sits nearby with her needlework. Her husband reads by the fire, and I am surrounded by the quiet domesticity I never thought I would have. But inside me, always, the voices whisper. Catherine tells me about her son. Margaret shares her strength. Vivian remembers Sebastian's touch. Eleanor mourns the simple life she might have lived. And I listen to all of them, honor all of them, carry all of them forward into each new day. Because that is what it means to be this self. This strange collective consciousness that emerged from violation and grief and love, too powerful to be constrained by death. I am all of them, and they are all me, and together we are something that has never existed before and will never exist again. I am the woman who woke fluent in each other's memories, and I am learning slowly to speak in all their voices, to live all their lives, to be one self made of many. It is a strange gift, this multiplicity, a terrible gift. But it is mine, and I will carry it until my own death comes, wondering even then if consciousness can truly end, or if we simply scatter and merge and reform into new configurations, new selves, new impossible possibilities. The bells ring in the distance, calling the faithful to Christmas service. Charlotte looks up and smiles, and I smile back with everyone's smile, everyone's love. And in this moment, I am content. In this moment, all of us are home.